Joined here on Celtic Exchange, and I'm delighted to be joined by a man known threefold as another one from Paul on YouTube, as channel 67 underscore on Twitter, but in real life is Paul. Paul, welcome initially to Celtic Exchange. How are things with you today?
Brilliant, Tino. Delighted to be here. Thanks very much for inviting me. I have to admit, I'm slightly devastated to see that Myth hasn't bothered to come along today, but sure, we can always do it again sometime.
I could kid on he's actually sitting just behind us here on his usual chair, but alas, he won't be here today, but we'll tie in with Myth at some point soon. Tell me, are you basking in the glory of a rare European away victory for Celtic?
Couldn't believe it, as everybody else was pointing out last night. It brought back memories of the 3-1 game in Amsterdam under O'Neill the first time. I was messaging you beforehand that I didn't give a prediction because it wasn't going to be pretty. Honestly, I'll admit it now, I was going 3-4-0, but here, happy days, some performance. Great way to say goodbye to O'Neill. And I know there's the temptation to keep him on, but the way I view it is it ended in tears with Lenny, it ended in tears with Rodgers. Hopefully this is a great way to say goodbye to the great man.
Yeah, do you know, it just seems perfect. We covered a bit of it this morning and last night in the post-match, actually, myself and James. James was in Amsterdam 24 years ago when Martin O'Neill's side were beating Ajax 3-1. And to fast forward to last night, it seems perfect. What will be against Hibs on Sunday, but there's no better way for Martin O'Neill to sign off. We're going to get to Martin O'Neill and his first era, 2000 to 2005, just a bit later on in the piece. But yeah, just the perfect send-off for a great Celtic man, eh?
Yeah, and that's one of those games when you look back, if you could pick games you'd like to be at, that would be a top 5, the Amsterdam 3-1 game against Ajax. I remember watching it in our spare room and everybody going nuts. It was on BBC Scotland, and my dad used to have the dodgy aerial dish to get BBC Scotland in Belfast. And I remember that game so vividly. But yeah, great way to send him off last night.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I say, we'll get to Martin O'Neill and a whole lot more as we move through. Just to open things out, Paul, so you've kind of gained, from what I can see, cult hero status in the Celtic world for your YouTube channel there, as mentioned. Another one from Paul. Be sure to subscribe if you don't do so already. But how would you describe your channel for someone who hasn't yet seen it?
Very kind to say. There's 2 parts to the channel. There's one I've been doing for years where I do sort of biographical videos on old players or moments, and they sort of explain themselves. But I decided one day, I have this streamer that I like to watch. He's had his own website for years. I have to give him credit. He's an American guy called Mike David. He does a show called Red Bar. And what it is he sits with the screen behind him at a pointer like this, talking about the things that interest him. It's not Celtic fan media, of course. It's like the online world of comedians and streamers he reviews. I've wanted to do something like that. I started the channel, got a wee bit of a following with the videos, and I thought, I want to finally do this. So that's how channel 67 came about. I could pretend it's all original. I thought of all myself with the wife off camera and pointing to the screen, but I have to give him credit for the man who inspired it all. So as much as I do love all the Celtic fan media like yourself and Axom, it was actually an American streamer who really did inspire me to do it.
What's the old saying? It's something like good artists borrow, great artists steal, something like that, isn't it? So yeah. No bad idea to be following on. In terms of when you get started, Paul, around about lockdown times, COVID times, like all of us?
Yeah, exactly. So it was during COVID. I was stuck at home feeling unproductive, and I wanted to do something just to feel productive. I went to university, believe it or not. I did go to university to do film studies. An absolute waste of a degree, not worth the paper it's printed on. Finished it up. Did nothing with it, knew I didn't want to do anything with it, but the one thing I did learn on that course was how to make and edit videos. So I thought I might as well try to do something with this 30k worth of debt. I know how to make a video. I'll stick something up on YouTube, see how it goes. And that's how it all began during COVID.
Yeah. And on that note then, what would be amongst your most popular videos to date? I've had a good look through the back catalogue. There's some weird and wonderful efforts in there.
Yeah, I was having a look at it. I still don't understand why, but I made a video about Paddy McCourt, a man who back in my school days, in school people used to tell me I looked like all the time. I had the Paddy McCourt hair back then. For some reason, that has 70k views. I don't know what happened that got that in the algorithm, but it just took off. And I also made one about how despicable Hadj Diouf is, that a lot of people liked and agreed with, and then sort of the African fans, who are the only people in the world that seem to hold him in good regard, got into the comment section, and that helped it out as well, even if they were all saying, he's a great man, he conquered Europe. But those are the two of the best ones I've managed to have. Paddy McCourt and Hadj Diouf, 2 very different people.
Yeah, and I was having a look, there's various elements, there's kind of the rise and fall of various players. There's a Hugh Dallas video which seems to have picked up good numbers. So as I say, if you're not already checking out Paul's work, be sure to do so.
Yeah.
Paul, you're a man from Belfast. You've been travelling over on and off at different times for games since 1996, I believe. So I tuned in to a really good episode between yourself and Steve-O from Celtic World Order.
Yes, I'm wearing a Celtic World Order top underneath here for Steve-O. Yeah, first game was, I thought it was 5-1 when I mentioned it on Steve-O's show, but I actually looked it up. My memory's wrong. It was 5-0. Again, I was 3 years old. 3 years old. It'd have been the vaguest of memories of it, which might actually be fake memories that I've created over the years. The one that stuck out was Hibs were playing in their purple away kit, and it was a big Barney the Dinosaur ultra at the time, so I remember seeing that and actually quite liking Hibs because of that. But I know that I got to see the three amigos that day, and that was something I would tell people going forward, even though I didn't know who Tino, Van Hooydonk or Cadetti were at the time. But yeah, what a first game to go to. And the first, I think I counted last night, the first 7 times I went to Celtic Park, we scored 5 goals. So I used to be a bit of a good luck symbol back in the day as a kid going away.
Yeah, it's not a bad record to start off with. And you mentioned the three amigos, Di Canio, Cadetti, Van Hooydonk. You've got a video on them, I believe, haven't you?
Yeah, I think that might have been, that was either the first or second one I posted up during COVID. I was just sitting at home thinking, what do I know about? I know something about Celtic, that's one thing I know. And I decided to go from that first memory of what's the first thing I remember, first game. So that's why I did the Three Amigos video. And then since then, I've sort of cheated by making an individual video for each one as well. So I've managed to get a lot of life out of Three Amigos.
Fair enough. Let me ask now, with your, as I say, newly found cult status in Celtic World, have you found yourself being recognised in Belfast and or Glasgow?
Absolutely not. I've had an old friend who already knew me that I hadn't saw in a few years. I saw him out one night and he's like, I've been watching the channel since day one. But apart from that, if I was to go over to Glasgow again anytime soon, I'm afraid if Cy Ferry or Neil Lennon saw me, they'd want to attack me for some of the things that I've said. So I might be a bit head down the next time I get over. Do you know, apart from COVID, this is the first time since childhood that I've gone a full calendar year without getting over for a match. I've got 2 complicated worded medical issues. I've got cystic fibrosis and ulcerative colitis. I've got both, and they've flared up at times this year, so I haven't got over, but I can't wait to get back. As long as we're not boycotting games in early 2026, I can't wait to get back over at some point.
Good stuff. And listen, I hope you're back before too long. Maybe you'll make it to the Europa League final, Istanbul this year.
I don't know why I had in my head it was Dublin. It was Dublin maybe last year, was it, or a few years ago? Yeah, maybe I'll be over to Istanbul and me and Cy Ferry can share a drink and smooth things over in the end.
You can have it out in the hotel bar. Tell me, does a magic pointer go where you go? Do you take that to Celtic Park with you?
Imagine I'm desperate to be recognised. I brought this over to Celtic Park stand. Does anybody watch Channel 67? But yeah, no, the pointer is strictly only for the Channel 67 videos, thankfully.
Paul, what we'll do to get started, so as mentioned, we're going to get into a bit of detail. I've asked you to pick out a favoured era from your Celtic supporting life, and we'll focus on that in the middle part of the recording. But just to get us going, just to kind of get the wheels in motion, I'm going to do a very quick Celtic version of Would You Rather. So I'm sure you know the format. Just a few quick fire questions where I paint 2 scenarios and you tell me which one you'd rather see unfold and why. So you good to go for that, and we'll get started?
Very much so. Sounds good, Tino.
Let's go with your old pal, a fella you've mentioned a few times on the show. If you could have one manager returning for a third spell as Celtic boss, would it be Neil Lennon or Brendan Rodgers?
Here's the reason it would be Neil Lennon, because we already know what Brendan Rodgers would be. It would start well, he'd complain about transfers, it would end in tears. With Neil Lennon, it would either be feast or famine, we'd either be relegated to the Scottish Championship or somehow fluke our way to a Champions League win. For a sort of perverse thing, I would love Lenny to get a third go. It would either be a miracle or an even worse nightmare than before.
Yeah. For Brendan Rodgers, you're right, it would probably end in tears. With Lenny, do you think it might start in tears? It might be tears all the way through.
And go downhill from there. Yeah, you just have this feeling that the club are itching to bring him back in some role, whether it's like technical scout or something like that. He's coming back eventually. You can feel it in the air. If this board remain, Lenny will be back.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to, as I say, cover Martin O'Neill in a wee bit more detail just shortly, but how do you think, just in short, Lenny and Brendan Rodgers should be remembered, what their legacies are now at Celtic? I do like to stay positive about both of them, even though it ended so badly and so bitterly with Lennon. For a long time, I actually cut him slack, and I made a channel that had sort of a positive spin on, I made a video on the channel that had a positive spin on Neil Lennon about a year or two ago. But his recent comment, it's the sucking up to the board, and beyond everything else, it's the Mr. Desmond stuff that's so transparent that you sort of want to heal things and build a bridge, but he can't help himself from making it worse. I feel like towards maybe a certain element of the fans, he can't let it go. Even if some fans are prepared to forgive, maybe he's not. So
I would love Lennon to be remembered fondly for everything he went through, but it seems like there's just too much there. With Rodgers, I think over time you will, by fans at least, generally be remembered fondly. Maybe the people who never fully forgave him for leaving the first time won't, but generally I think Rodgers will be remembered well. Well, except by Dermot.
Yeah, and by Miff. Miff
And
was
by Chris, yeah.
Miff was grudgingly enjoying Brendan Rodgers'
Yeah.
second time around, and he won a double and then another double, and Miff was kind of applauding through gritted teeth. And I think now that it's finished the way it has, Miff is back to being at peace with that one. Let's move on to question number 2. There's a lot of debate in Celtic world about our lack of European success, and obviously it's top of the table right now following last night's big win in Feyenoord. But would you take the option of a domestic treble this season or reaching the Europa League semi-final? You can only choose one or the other.
See, now, if you'd offered me Europa League final, I'd have taken it all day long. Semi-final's not enough to sacrifice domestic treble for. My second favourite season ever, I'll talk about favourite season, but my second favourite season was the Seville season, where we didn't win a trophy and did get the European final. Because we've had so much domestic success, I would sacrifice it for a year for a European final, but I can't say I would do it for a semi-final.
Fair enough. I'll need to reword my questions moving forward, but you wouldn't take it for the semi-final. So a domestic treble this time around. Question number 3. You've got the choice to have Henrik Larsson as a centre forward in the current team, or you can have the Seville team with Shin Yamada as your centre forward. Who are you picking?
Oh, it has to be just anything with Henrik. And I was thinking about this. For all the players we've had since the day I was born to the current squad, there's only one player I think about every day, and it's Henrik. So anything that brings Henrik back, it has to be. Remember, when Ronnie was appointed, I was one of those people that was hoping Henrik was going to come in as manager. It seemed like that would have been the only time to do it. There were no Rangers in the league, no pressure, but it wasn't to be, was it really, in the end?
Yeah. Do you know, it's funny, I was just kind of coming up with a couple of the different questions here. And often you find yourself when you're asking these hypotheticals, you know, would you rather, or what would your strongest or your favourite Celtic 11 be? You almost end up asking the question, but can you take Larsson out? Because it's a given, isn't it, that Larsson would always be in everyone's top 11 in any greatest Celtic team.
It's never felt the same since without him. And that's the truth. Deep down, there's always been a piece missing.
There was clamour at one point for him to come back as manager, as you mentioned, but we'll talk about the fact that there was questions over Martin O'Neill returning and maybe tarnishing his legacy. I don't think, I might be wrong, I don't think Henrik Larsson just seems quite cut out to be a top-level manager.
Yeah.
And he could have taken the job potentially at some point, but it might have just muddied the waters a wee bit. I
agree completely. You'd fear it all ended in disaster, and Henrik's one of those ones that left completely untainted, the perfect goodbye. So maybe it was for the best he never did come back as manager, yeah.
What do you think of the fact that some folks booed him when he scored against us for Barcelona?
Genuinely angers me. I remember I used to be on the message boards back in the day, back then, like as a 10-year-old kid, and even people were saying I booed. And I just remember thinking, I hate you for booing Henrik. How could you do it? I wasn't even hurt at the time. What was it? It was a bad back pass, wasn't it? And he lobbed David Marshall and they tapped it in at the other side. It was something like that. I just remember thinking, great goal, Henrik, and being angry at the people booing him.
Yeah, it's funny. And, you know, of course, very generally speaking, most of us will take a Celtic kind of first approach, and that's right to do so. But you can just, you don't need to applaud and cheer the goal, but you can just accept, you know, the man was doing his job, and for the 7 years great service he gave Celtic, I think you've just got to take that one on the chin.
Exactly. It's the one exception.
Exactly. Let's move forward then. So, question number 4. Callum McGregor picks up great plaudits at this moment in time for how he's led Celtic, and another massive goal against St Mirren just last Saturday night to see us through in a 1-0 win. But would you take peak Callum McGregor as your captain, or peak Scott Brown as your Celtic captain?
It's a great question. I actually made a video about all of our 21st century captains recently. I don't know if I've posted it on YouTube or not yet, but it's going up eventually. But I would say as a captain, it has to be Scott Brown. Remember, in Football Manager, they have the mental attributes, and every year Scott Brown will have 20 out of 20 for leadership and 20 out of 20 for bravery. I just think he's the perfect captain, even though overall I'd probably say McGregor's the better actual footballer. But if we're talking captain, it has to be Scott Brown for me.
Yeah, captain, leader, legend, all that kind of stuff.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Next question. You can go on a night out with one of these two men, Artur Boric or Bolly Bolingoli.
It has to be, to give him his full name, Bully Bolingoli Mbombo. His cousins are Jordan and Romelu Lukaku, so he might invite the boys along. And then you never know where you end up. You may get on a flight somewhere, wake up the next morning somewhere exotic with Bully Bolingoli Mbombo. It's a night out you couldn't turn down. Whereas with Borge, it could end in a massive fight. So with Mbombo, at least you know you're going to have a good time and end up somewhere exciting.
Yeah, either way, I'm sure it'll be pretty lively. But
Yeah.
Bolingoli and Bombo gets the nod for that one. Last question, and I suppose as opposed to the others, it's maybe a slightly more serious question because it's the others are far more hypothetical. This one's a possibility, and the question is: would you rather the dominant shareholder Dermot Desmond on 34.7%, a man worth 2 point whatever billion? Would you rather he remained in charge of Celtic, and he is in charge whether we like it or not? And he is the man that calls the shots. Would you rather it was Dermot Desmond in charge or some mystery Saudi billionaire?
I remember there was an old episode of Family Guy where Peter Griffin wins a prize and he goes to collect it. And when he goes to collect this like expensive prize that he's won, they go, you can have the prize or you can have this mystery box. And it's just a cardboard box with a load of question marks on it. And he can't help himself from the temptation of taking the mystery box. I know we know what we'll have with Dermot, like it or not. But the mystery box I would go for in this scenario, I know it could end badly. I know it could be worse. It could somehow be worse, but I would have to take it at this point.
I think that's a fair answer. So we could have had Dermot Desmond, better the devil, We could have had mystery Saudi backers, but you've gone for mystery option C, the mystery box, and it could be a spectacular success or a spectacular failure. We'll just need to wait and see.
And he's not unmovable. United got rid of the Glazers eventually. Newcastle got rid of Mike Ashley. I know it seems impossible, but he won't be around forever. And dear God, don't let it go down to Ross, because that is option D, the worst option of all.
I mean, do you have a general take on that? So I was at the AGM this time last Friday. I'm not a shareholder, but someone kindly proxied me in. So I was in the room for all the madness, and there was madness all around us, and people will debate the merits of how certain folk behaved, and that's up to them. But there is no doubt that Ross Desmond's words caught us all off guard, and I thought actually it was a real opportunity for Ross Desmond to extend the olive branch and say, listen, it's been terrible, really bad, but here's how we're going to fix it, and this is day one of us moving forward. But he chose violence on the day, and the rest, as we know, is now new Celtic history. What was your take, just briefly, on those events? Yeah,
I agree completely with yourself and what everybody's been saying. It just felt like Ross Desmond went in to cause as much trouble, to have a go on behalf of himself and his dad. And he had no intention of answering questions. I know it's sort of conspiratorial to say their plan all along was to send Ross Desmond out, get everyone angry and close it down. But I don't think, even if they'd allowed questions, they would have answered them properly. I think Ross Desmond wanted to have his go. And then when everybody was acting crazy, Peter Law was happy enough to close it down. But just to echo what everybody else on Celtic's fan media has been saying, I can't add much new to it than what we've already all said, really.
My general take, and I kind of stand by it until someone says otherwise, I believe that Ross Desmond blindsided the whole room, including the top table. I don't believe Ross Desmond or his dad are the kind of guys that have their homework checked before they go and, read their speeches. And I think he's just gone with that. There was a theory, can't remember who I was chatting with earlier on in the week, who said he had speech A in this pocket and speech B in that pocket, and depending on the way the meeting was going, he was going to whip out the relevant speech. But he's absolutely rocked the boat with that one, hasn't he?
And it just seems like, how does he recover from that? How does he get the majority of fans on side? Unless he never intends to get the majority of fans on side.
Yeah, just to wrap up on it, I thought, because we hadn't really heard much from Ross Desmond, a lot of folk were thinking, well, actually, Dermot's getting to a certain age. At some point, he'll pass it on to the son. And who knows, maybe he'll be more hands-on, at the coalface, trying to make things better at Celtic. But if that is his plan, he's got off to a spectacularly bad start. So anyway, we are where we are.
Exactly.
Let's go back in time then, Paul. So ahead of this recording, just in the last couple of days, we've been in touch, and we are now going to discuss a particular Celtic era in your lifetime. Not necessarily your favourite era, although it may be, you can tell me in a moment. But I thought it'd be good to discuss one of 5 different eras, and I gave you 5 to choose from just before we get started in this recording. So the 5 options you had: Ange Ball, 2 years of joy, mostly under Ange Postecoglou. Era number 2 was Brendan Rodgers Volume 2, 2023 to 2025. Of course, that came to a spectacular end just 4-ish weeks ago. You could have chosen the COVID Cup, Celtic's disastrous attempt at 10 in a row during season 2020-2021. The Ronnie Roar, Ronnie Dyler, 2014 to Ronnie 16, or Martin O'Neill, the man who changed everything, between 2000 and 2005. Tell us what choice you made and why.
I've gone with the glorious Martin O'Neill's first era of 2000 to 2005. It's the first era of football that I properly remember when I really understood and got into football, and nothing has touched it since. It's one of those things, is your memory clouded by nostalgia and have you sort of filtered out the bad stuff and only remember the good? And the truth is, no, it really was that good. It was the best era for me as a Celtic fan in my life, and I can talk about it endlessly, so it was an easy choice to make.
Ideal. Were you swayed by any of the other choices for any reason? Any others that you might have considered, if not the O'Neill one?
The other one I was considering picking would have been the Ronnie Deila years, because it's sort of undercovered these days. It's sort of one of the least memorable periods in Celtic recent history in many ways. So it'd be interesting to go over that at some point, but it's too tempting to do the O'Neill glory years first.
I don't know why exactly. Maybe I'll need to drill into it with him. But Paddy here from the show, he gets all misty-eyed when talking about Ronnie Deila. I don't know if it was just...
he says he's a big fan. Yeah, he follows him in the MLS. I've heard him say recently. Yeah.
Exactly. He's a massive fan. And I don't know if it's because he was maybe doing some European away travel at that time, or maybe it was some of the kind of cult players that played with us. I'm not entirely sure. I'll need to check that with Paddy, and I'll do so over the next couple of weeks. But to get started then, in terms of the Martin O'Neill era, I mentioned briefly that Chris Sutton had, stressed or expressed his concerns that Martin O'Neill coming back for this interim management spell could tarnish his legacy at the club. Did you have the same concerns for a guy that you clearly hold in high esteem?
It was my first, when Dermot Desmond released that statement saying Rodgers had left and Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney were coming in, it was my first fear was, oh no, because I used to love Neil Lennon and it's all ended so badly. And then obviously that is exactly when the Brendan Rodgers stuff happened. My first thought, rather than being happy that Martin O'Neill was back, was, oh no, it's going to happen again. It's going to end badly. But overall, delighted with how the interim spell has went. And on the first day, what was the first game? Falkirk, I think, his first home game with O'Neill back. Seeing him back on the touchline, like all those sort of modern football doubts of like, does he get it? Does he know data analysis? Does he know the password to Gavin Strachan's laptop? At all, once you saw him on the touchline, it all felt right again.
Yeah, there was also something a bit unusual about watching a 73-year-old man, a man that we all adore, cutting about in a fancy Adidas tracksuit on the sidelines.
Skin-tight leggings, yeah.
So I was at the press conference when Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney returned, as I say, 4 odd weeks ago, maybe nearly 5 weeks ago actually. And someone commented at the time that Martin O'Neill had fallen very easily back into almost like the after dinner speaking mode, the circuit that he'd been on for the last X number of years. He's not managed since he took Forest, I think, in 2019.
Yeah.
And at his press conference, he was full of quips and lightheartedness and all those kind of things that you've kind of come to expect of the Martin O'Neill in recent years. But there is no doubt that lying under the surface is a very serious man and a very intelligent man and a guy who absolutely knows how to get the best out of his players.
Yeah, he's one of the rare people in football where you think he's an actual genuine intelligent person outside of football. He doesn't just have football and brains. So, like, you can never underestimate him. And it was, he did have some funny quips. But yeah, as you say, the real Martin O'Neill is under the surface. And if something had happened that he got it full time, that wasn't going to be the way every press conference would have went going forward. Would have been interesting to see in a way.
Yeah, I thought when he was talking ahead of the Feyenoord game from last night, in the pre-match press conference, which will have been on Wednesday, he was kind of talking down Celtic's chances. He was talking about, the squad needs some work and, we got a tough lesson in Midtjylland. And a lot of folks were saying, oh, there's Martin O'Neill being defeatist and writing things off. My take on that, Paul, was that Martin O'Neill, like a lot of good managers and a lot of managers over the years, they'll say one thing to the media. It's a completely different message to the boys in the dressing room. And I think it looks like that's how he's played that one last night. Yeah,
definitely. And O'Neill's basically the only person there, well, no, John Kennedy left, so who was still there from 2005, part of the coaching team, part of the background team. And even that 2004-05 season, the post-Henrik squad that he had was obviously of such a higher caliber than the one he has now. So I think he knows to sort of talk down the chances of this squad. Because even with the great win last night, I don't think we're going very far in Europe at all. And I think O'Neill, more than anybody who knows what it takes to take a squad far in Europe, can tell this isn't it.
Yeah, maybe so. So I don't want to get too bogged down in terms of Martin O'Neill Volume 2, as we say. Let's focus on those glory years, 2000 to 2005. So in June 2000, famously, Martin O'Neill declares on the steps of Celtic Park that he'll do everything in his power to bring some success to the football club. What age are you then, Paul? A very young man, I believe, but how do you feel that a man from your part of the world, from the north of Ireland, is taking charge of Celtic?
Yes, I actually remember around this time is really when I'm getting into football. So it's that Christmas, we got FIFA 2000. And so I was playing that and started learning lots of teams and lots of players' names. And my interest in football starting to really build up. I remember right before O'Neill came in, we lost a derby game 4-0 to Rangers at Ibrox under, I think it was under Kenny Dalglish. It was after Barnes had left. And I remember watching that game, but not really fully understanding how bad things were. Like, we've just lost 4-0. So when O'Neill was appointed, I didn't really have a grasp of, oh, this guy just come from Leicester winning League Cups in England. I didn't really have a grasp of who he was yet. I'd heard the name, but I knew nothing about him. So I wasn't excited. But my dad and brother, my older brother and my dad, the reason I'm a Celtic fan is because of my dad. He was sort of a bit on the fence about O'Neill. He'll admit at the time he sort of wanted other candidates. So it wasn't like my household was all delighted. Oh, he's a local lad's got it. There was a bit of, I remember in the Murphy household in 2000, there was actually scepticism over O'Neill at first. That's my first memories about him being appointed.
That's funny, because my next question was going to be, surely, so you and your family are Belfast people, Martin O'Neill's from Derry, and I thought there would be a real buzz around someone from your part of the world getting the job, but not quite so much.
There might have been elsewhere, but for some reason in the Murphy household, I remember the overriding thought was, we'll see how it goes. But I don't remember, and I was young and would obviously been behind Rangers for so long at that point, but I don't remember at all anybody I knew saying like, yes, this is it, we're going to turn things around. I don't remember that excitement at all, but maybe other people felt different.
Yeah, maybe so. And obviously, it doesn't take Martin O'Neill long to start to turn people around, because the highlights during those 5 years, Paul, are plentiful. There's so many huge moments, huge examples, huge seasons. I suppose the first one would be the 6-2 game in August 2000. A lot of, I mentioned Martin O'Neill there as the man who changed everything. A lot of folks see that game as the game that changed everything in terms of Celtic and Rangers in the modern era. You've then got the fact that he wins a domestic treble during that first season, a first treble for Celtic since Jock Stein's team in 1969. We have our first venture into the Champions League. We qualify by beating Ajax over 2 legs, and we then take on Juve, Rosenborg and Porto and everything that went with that. And of course, we then have the Seville run, a real season of pride for Celtic supporters, but ultimately of heartbreak, given the way it all played out. Where do you want to start, Paul? What would be your own kind of highlights or your focus points for those 5 years?
I'm sort of happy enough to go through chronologically. We'll start with the first season, which I was saying earlier, the Seville season is my second favourite. My favourite season as a Celtic fan is still the domestic treble O'Neill won in his first year, 2000, 2001. It's the first full year I understand football and I'm following it properly, and I couldn't have enjoyed it more. And I still remember my dad used to, when I was younger, much younger, he used to go over to games, but by this point he was sort of staying home and we were watching all the games on TV together. My house used to be filled with people. He'd invite his friends over. And so just great memories of that season. And everybody sort of going nuts every game, because it felt like we were just on an unstoppable winning streak at the time, that whole season. And again, early on, I didn't fully understand how amazing it was. I suppose for long-term fans, it was an unbelievable turnaround. But for me, it was just immediate introduction to success at Celtic. I expected Celtic to win and beat Rangers right away, all because of that season. And I only sort of learned as years went on. It wasn't like that before Martin O'Neill for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you know, the season, when you take a step back and just look at it as a whole, it's a treble winning season. We beat Rangers 6-2, but not all smooth sailing. We got beat by Rangers 5-1, didn't we?
I remember being, that's one of my first real complete shocks as a fan, because at the time I thought we're so much better than Rangers. We just beat them 6-2. I remember that game. I think it was 1 each, possibly, when Alan Thompson got sent off, which really turned the game around. Whereas in the 6-2 game, Barry Ferguson got sent off when it was already 5-2. And a few months later, so it's interesting, we win 6-2, and then a few months later, we lose 5-1. But I think that was a key turning point in the game that I remember. It was either 1-each or 2-1 when Thompson got sent off. And then Rob Douglas sort of had a nightmare flapping at corners, and Torrey Andre Flo, it was either his debut or his home debut, and he scored a couple, and they spent so much money on him, and I remember thinking, is he going to be good? Obviously, it turned out not to be very good. But I always think that 5-1 game makes it sound like, oh, it was so back and forth. But I think that was kind of an outlier for that season, really.
I think so, and I think, you know, we've all heard guys like Chris Sutton and various players from that team, including Martin O'Neill, actually speaking at different points in recent years. And they're quick to point out, and they're right to point out, that it was a strong Rangers. It wasn't like Celtic were dominating a recently reformed Rangers or anything of that nature.
Rangers,
this strong Rangers. Correct. There was, guys like, whether they were that season, but guys like De Boer, Dutch internationals, some seriously good players, and it tells you a lot about how strong Celtic were at that time to overcome them. You mentioned there that 5-1 game was your first kind of real setback, I suppose, as a young fan in terms of what's happening here. Miff tells a story of quite recently. I think it was maybe at some point last year where Celtic lost a game to Rangers, and his two young lads, I keep forgetting their ages, but they're around about, one of his lads is 11 or 12, the other's maybe a bit younger, 7 or 8. They don't really understand what it means to lose to Rangers, generally speaking, in their young Celtic supporting lives, and Miff takes them to the games. They don't really, they can't compute when Celtic don't win, and certainly when they don't win against Rangers. And I think the story goes that one of them, on getting beat by Rangers, fired the new mobile phone across the living room floor. And Miff was like, absolutely not. You need to get used to this. This isn't how it goes. But for a young guy, and I suppose you can relate, it takes a bit of getting used to the ups and downs of competitive sport.
Absolutely. And that brings me on. I have a visual aid I'm going to use here to help tell this anecdote. So the next season, we had won the league. They had won the League Cup. And then if you remember, 0-2 Scottish Cup final, Celtic versus Rangers. And we just finished I think something ridiculous, 15 or 20 points ahead of them. So I was very confident going into that game that it would be another win for Celtic. We lost 3-2. Peter Lovenkrands scored a last-minute header, and I remember being completely shell-shocked. I fully expected Celtic to win that game. So here's my visual aid. I hope that's the right way around, not back to front. It's my primary 4 homework journal. And in that, when you came back into school, you had to write about what you did at the weekend, okay? Now, I'm warning in advance, there's a bit of choice language in this that I'll work around if possible. I'm 8 years old at this point. You can see there, Tuesday the 7th of May, 2002. This is my entry into my homework journal that day. So on Saturday, it was the Tennant Scottish Cup final and the FA English Cup final. Rangers, better known as Scum, spelled S-K-U-M, beat Celtic 3-2, and the Gunners beat Chelsea 2-0. Scum, as an 8-year-old. Now, I wonder where I'm picking that up. So I was a very unhappy young man in school after the 2002 Scottish Cup final.
I'm going to exempt you from blame, and I'm going to blame your teachers or your peers. You were too young to know better. It's those that were around you at that time.
That's the thing. The teacher who marked it gave me a gold star and wrote excellent at the bottom of it. So they were obviously very happy with that report. A match report you wouldn't get on the Celtic Star these days.
No, true. Gold star from your teacher, 11 out of 10. Well done, Paul. Keep up the good work and all of that. So that anecdote absolutely covers the 2001-2002 season. And then we move forward to what will ever be known as the Seville season. And as you rightly say, your own second favourite season as a Celtic supporter. And bizarrely, I suppose, or ironically, it's a season where we win nothing. We lose out in Seville. In the end, we lose the league on the last day, and Chris Sutton's famously quoted as saying that Dunfermline lay down to Rangers at that time.
Which they did.
I think that was the case. But it was a hell of a season, and I suppose for the European, the big nights under the lights, basically, for want of a better expression, the game against Liverpool, John Hartson's goal against Liverpool, Celta Vigo, John Hartson again, actually, and you do wonder if John Hartson could have made a difference in that final. He had to miss it with a back injury. Henrik Larsson against Boavista, now defunct Boavista. Just this week they have gone to the wall.
Seriously, I didn't even know that. I haven't heard that yet. No.
That's just happened in the last few days. 120 odd years of Boavista gone. They're finished. But for Celtic, so many highlights. Is there any that stand out for you? And what player? Larsson, of course, but what player aside from Larsson was excelling for you at that time?
Apart from Henrik, the two players I really grew to love during that I already loved them, but particularly during that campaign were Alan Thompson and Stiliyan Petrov. I think Alan Thompson's almost, even though everybody thinks highly of him, almost underrated when you look back on the sort of 2000-2005 period of how many big goals he scored. He has a decent goal scoring record as a Celtic player, but it's big games where he really came to life. I remember the one time on the run, I was pretty confident throughout it against most teams, but after we drew 1 each at home to Liverpool, and being in Belfast, you have a lot of friends who are Liverpool fans, and I remember sort of thinking, oh no, we're going to lose at Anfield and I'm going to get slagged off because of it. And I remember a few days earlier, we had lost the League Cup final 2-1, and Hartson missed that 90th minute penalty, which would have sent it to extra time. And he also had that goal unfairly offside. And I remember being furious at John Hartson, really taking it personally somehow, and not believing when he scored that second goal at the end. A glorious memory. For no reason, I was wrapped in a tricolour in the living room that day watching the game, but I remember that so vividly after the match, being delighted. That was the one time on the run I thought, though, oh no, this is it.
Yeah. You mentioned Alan Thompson. I believe that you and Paddy may well be kindred spirits. Tomo is Paddy's favourite player. I don't actually know why again. I need to speak to Paddy more and get the detail behind his love for Thompson and Ronnie Dyler, but massive Alan Thompson fan. And you're right to mention his massive goal at Anfield. Of course, it's John Hartson's goal that's remembered for the phenomenal strike that it was, but it's Thompson that gets the wheels in motion with the free kick under the wall, the low free kick to give us the 1-0 lead. And maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself, but it's Thompson that scores the goal that puts Barcelona out of the UEFA Cup in the 2004-05 season. The last time Celtic won a knockout tie, I believe, and he played a huge part in that team. But actually, Paul, when I was, kind of just looking through, and I suppose none of us really need too much reminding, but there was so many big characters, big personalities in that team. Larsson, of course, Chris Sutton, of course, Paul Lambert, Hartson we've mentioned, Petrov that you've mentioned, Lubo Moravcik in the early part of Martin O'Neill's reign, Neil Lennon, great player, you can't take that away, Jackie McNamara, so many great players, but all of them, as well as being good players, Paul, all leaders, all guys that could easily have been the captain.
Absolutely. And just mentioning Moravcik, there was a second story in this homework journal. I'll quickly flick through if I can find it. Basically, the gist of it was my teacher asked me, do you like playing football? I said, yes, I like playing in midfield and I like taking free kicks. And they asked, do you take free kicks like David Beckham? And I said, no, I do not take free kicks like David, what's his name? I take free kicks like Lubomir Moravcik. The whole squad then were unreal. And there's an odd story that Bobby Pettit tells now. He was amazing in the 6-2 game and at Amsterdam. But if you look out with those games, he didn't contribute all that much, honestly, to that treble winning squad or the UEFA Cup final squad. But he tells this story that on the day of the UEFA Cup final, Jose Mourinho came up to him and said he was shocked that Martin O'Neill didn't drop Alan Thompson for Bobby Pettit. And that just cannot be true, because Pettit was so far out of the picture at that point. I honestly think Bobby Pettit's either been lied to or he's made this story up. There's no way you're dropping 2003 Alan Thompson for Bobby Pettit.
There's absolutely not, and you're right. He had a couple of big moments in a Celtic shirt. He had a great game against Fernando Rickson in the 6-2 game. He was great against Ajax away. He scored one of the goals that night, as did Didi Agat and Chris Sutton. But that aside, I'm finding it hard to picture the highlights for Bobby Pettit. I've actually seen some folks comparing Yang of last night. They basically said that Martin O'Neill has done with Yang what he done with Bobby Pettit on a couple of occasions. He got the best out of this guy just on the special occasion when he needed him most. But and maybe that's doing a disservice to one or the other. But no, there's no way you take prime Alan Thompson out of that team, is there?
Not a chance. It seems like a story that Bobby Pettit would maybe like to be true, and I'm not saying he's a liar, but the idea that you would drop somebody as important as Alan Thompson, genuinely, if that had happened, the outrage of the fans would have been unbelievable. But it is a shame we had nothing, apart from Jackie McNamara, we had nothing really to come off the bench in the UEFA Cup final because Hartson missed the game with injury. So I think our three subs who came on were Jackie McNamara, Ulrich Larsson and Sean Maloney. And Maloney sort of was pretty young and inexperienced at the time. He had a chance to cross the ball in the dying seconds and put it straight out of play. It's the only contribution I remember from Maloney in the final.
Do you know, that's funny you should say it. It's one of my override memories. I was lucky enough to be at the final.
No way. I didn't know you were at the final. Amazing.
Yeah, got tickets through Magnus Hedman. He himself was another story altogether, but somebody knew somebody that knew somebody that knew Magnus Hedman, so we ended up going. My brothers were both there, dad, family, all great stuff. Amazing experience, absolutely. But one of my override memories out with, of course, Larsson's brilliant performance and the big goals was Sean Maloney coming on and almost pulling rank. Henrik Larsson was still on the pitch and Sean Maloney took the free kick, and I thought, what's going on here? And as you rightly say, he blazed it over the bar. Now, I wonder as well if I'm misremembering some things, because I've never watched that game back. I don't think I will ever watch the game back. It's just, it is where it is, somewhere in the archives. But what do you think? And you'll remember his name, I think, better than I will. The fella just now doing he's kind of digging up footballers who are going on podcasts and misremembering things. You know what I'm talking about? Is it Prince something?
Yes, I've seen clips of him. I can't remember his name. I have watched him, but yeah, it's good stuff. It's something I would like to maybe copy from him if I ever was to go beyond Celtic fan content. But who needs to go beyond that? Yeah. We have so much to go for. I love his stuff, though. It is
correct. But as covered earlier on, great artist Steele, and his format is interesting. For anyone who doesn't know, I'll try and remember his name and I'll put it in the show notes. But what he does is he basically digs up footballers who go onto podcasts, and there's no end of footballers jumping onto podcasts these days, and they all seem to be like misremembering the facts. And I would hope and think that it's with good intentions, but some of them are remembering hat tricks they scored, which never happened.
Yeah.
They're remembering teammates they played with that turns out they never played with, and all sorts of things like that. But my own memory from the time at Seville was that Sean Maloney, who's done a brilliant job here, by the way, and hopefully he's around for a long time to come. But when you've got Henrik Larsson on the park and you've got a free kick in the dying embers of a UEFA Cup final, you let Henrik Larsson take that free kick.
Exactly.
Paul, an amazing season. Any other memories of the Seville season, or is that where it's at for you for that one?
Another visual prompt here, just sort of to use. At the time, I was a big collector of the Celtic View, and I just remember every game religiously. My two favourite pages were, the first was, remember there used to be the comic every week in the Celtic View, but it was, I'll try to find it here, it was the tamest sense of humour you'll ever see. It would be stuff like, Martin O'Neill, I've lost my glasses. And the next frame would be Henrik going, here you go, Martin. And the third frame would just be Henrik, like, with his tongue out, winking at the camera. It was the tamest humour you'll ever see. But the page I was obsessed with, if you remember this, in the Celtic View, was the stats page. And it would have all those black dots. It would be black for a start, green if they come off the bench, and a number inside it meant they scored that amount of goals. And during that season in particular, I used to study that stats page religiously just to keep up to date with everything. So the whole way during the campaign, like if Petrov scored at home to Stuttgart, we'd all be cheering. I'd be like, that's his 7th goal of the season. As a real live data analysis before it was popular back then in the Murphy household.
Yeah. Have you carried that into adulthood? Are you big on data and stats and analysis in football?
What a missed opportunity that was for me. I was ahead of the game in that one, and then at a certain age, I just sort of stopped being so obsessed with stats. If I had kept that up, I'd be sitting in the dugout beside Gavin Strachan right now, I like to think. Oh, and I have to say, thanks very much for the shout out recently. Great episode of This Is Axon, where you talked about the book recommendation that, thank you for crediting it to me, but I'm going to pass it on to 20 Minute Tim's, because I got it from Martin Melly from 20 Minute Tim's originally, that How to Win the Premier League. I do like the idea that Celtic fan content are recommending each other books to read, and then over in the Rangers Rabble, they're recommending barbecues or whatever. But yeah, I should have stuck with the data analysis. Missed opportunity.
Yeah, credit was due, and thanks then to Melly, who recommended to you, who put it out there, because but I think I've actually mentioned that book. I'm kind of moderately obsessed with it at this moment in time, and I've mentioned it on our last 3 or 4 recordings. I'll mention it again now. The book is called How to Win the Premier League, by, I was going to say Ian Graham. I believe he's now Dr. Ian Graham, and he's a data performance analyst, and he easy for me to say. And he left Liverpool in 2022 after helping steer them towards the Premier League title with various data-driven models. It's just a really interesting take. Yeah. What's really interesting is how horrendously badly Brendan Rodgers comes out in the book, Paul.
It's interesting that bit where Rodgers really wanted Benteke, and they were sort of telling him he won't fit. And to prove the point, they got Ricky Lambert, who sort of had the exact same profile as Benteke, but was much cheaper. But Rodgers' take from Ricky Lambert not working was, well, it's because you got me the cheaper option, which is sort of an interesting thing that Rodgers, rightfully, in a lot of cases, does to this day, doesn't want to go with the cheaper option, which you can understand more so at Celtic. But in that book, you're right, Rodgers doesn't come across all that well. But it's not as if the author is panning Rodgers. He actually sort of justifies and understands a lot of Rodgers' decisions and says he would have made a lot of the same ones on a personal level. But when it comes to that sort of learning from data, it's obvious Rodgers didn't really go for it back when he was at Liverpool.
Yeah, and so Rodgers was there when Ian Graham first got involved around about 2012 until around about 2015. And obviously Rodgers was unlucky at one point, a Steven Gerrard slip.
Yep.
Otherwise, he could have taken Liverpool to the title, but there is no doubt he was shown at that point how stubborn he could be, and he was very much doing I'm the football guy here, I appreciate your input, data guys, but I know best, so I'll take Christian Benteke, and I'll take your man Joe, the Welsh Xavi.
The Welsh Xavi.
Joe Allen. All these kind of guys. And I wonder if he came round on data in the 10 plus years that followed since his exit from Liverpool, because you're right, there's various guys that have come to Celtic. So I don't think, we know all about this club signing thing, right? I don't think Shin Yamada and Hayato Anamura and various other players seem to be Brendan Rodgers players.
No way, yeah.
But somebody somewhere has ran the numbers and ran the data and suggested these guys are fairly cheap options. Let's bring them in. What's the worst that could happen? Yeah. And you can debate the merits of that strategy or not. But it seems that Rodgers just absolutely wouldn't go with a data-driven model. And he would always say, yeah, that's fine, but I'm going to go with this guy because I know him from my first spell at Celtic, or we used to play against him, blah, blah, blah. Do you think, I'm asking a big question here, do you think that might have played a part in his exit, or is it just maybe the clash of egos that seems to have played out between him and Dermot Desmond?
Actually, possibly so, because the repeatedly mentioned, even in Dermot Desmond's scathing attack on him, they mentioned there's nothing wrong with the model, which you would imagine would somehow involve data analysis. I'm sure the model isn't just what Dermot Desmond feels like, hopefully. But what I did find interesting, though, was after Liverpool, from Celtic to Leicester and then back to Celtic, Rodgers did make sure to bring a data analyst called Jack Lyons. He brought him to Celtic, brought him with him to Leicester, and brought him back to Celtic. So it seems like maybe he is more on board with it now than he was back at Liverpool previously.
It may well be the case, and I think Ian Graham is a guy. Liverpool have got far bigger resources than Celtic, and maybe Ian Graham had a team of 10, 15, 20 plus guys, whereas Celtic maybe wouldn't push the boat out. I thought it was interesting, actually. I know we've got a wee bit off track, but I thought it was interesting that during Ross Desmond's tirade, and let's call it a tirade, somewhere amongst the madness, and of course it was madness for 90% of it, he did mention at one point, and we are embracing the latest data analytics techniques, blah, blah, blah. And of course, that part of the message has got lost because there's so many headlines beyond that. But I do think it's interesting that he's mentioned that. And I do feel, my gut feeling is that Brendan Rodgers wasn't embracing that world, and that Wilfred Nancy and folk of his ilk might. And we'll get to Wilfred Nancy just a wee bit later in the piece, Paul. We'll cover a wee bit of his imminent arrival at Celtic Park. But let's go back, as I say, to that Martin O'Neill era. So, we've just lost the UEFA Cup final in Seville. You're a very young man. You're maybe 10, 11 years of age. How are you feeling at that moment in time about your heroes?
I remember being devastated and being a bit teary at the end of the game, feeling proud. But so our house used to be filled with my dad's friends who would come over for matches. But that night, this guy I'd never met before and I've never seen him again. He's my dad's brother's friend, so it was a rare appearance. And he was a bit drunk. It was after the game, so I'm 10. My brother's like, why am I 10? I haven't turned 10 yet. I'm still 9. My brother's like 13. We're both upset. And this guy, can't remember his name, never saw him again. So afterwards, he gave us this amazing pep talk of like, you should be proud, boys. You have no idea how far we've come. You're Celtic supporters, and that's better than any win. And he gave us this amazing pep talk that made me feel great. And then he disappeared into the night, never to be seen again. So I was upset at first, but then very proud of everything that had happened. Still to this day, but at the high point of my Celtic supporting lifetime. Get to that final.
Maybe that mystery man was the ghost of Celtic past there to give you a message about what you can learn from watching Celtic.
It stuck with me, didn't it? I don't know the man's name.
Yeah, it was a tough time. I remember, as I say, leaving the stadium, and I ended up kind of walking by some folks I knew from school. And what was that? I was 22 at that time. I was born in 81, 22. And I remember seeing some folks I knew from school who I hadn't seen since leaving school, maybe 3-4 years prior. And instead of doing, how's it going? How's things? I was just like, all right. you were just miserable. You were just absolutely devastated. But in the days and the weeks and the months and the years that follow, there's huge pride in how Celtic as a club carried themselves there, how the supporters carried themselves. And it's always a season we'll look back on fondly.
A few days later, wasn't it? We lost the league on goal difference on the final day of the season. I remember the build-up to that being so exciting because it was like we both kept winning, so we both had to keep scoring. And there was a game, I think, right before the UEFA Cup final. We beat Dundee 6-2. And in the 90th minute, maybe I'm remembering this wrong, was it Nacho Novo? It was 6-1, and Nacho Novo, somebody scored for Dundee to make it 6-2. And I remember everybody being so deflated, and it was this odd moment of we've just won a game 6-2, but that 90th minute goal felt like such a sucker punch.
I remember exactly that. That's my own take on it. I wouldn't have remembered it was Novo. We'll need to check, and it might or might not have been him. But I certainly remember the sentiment of hammering Dundee, but leaving deflated because you lost a goal and you knew how crucial that could have been. And I can't even remember the score on the final day. Did we win 4-0 and Rangers won 6-0 or something? Did we miss a penalty? Did Tomo miss a penalty?
Tomo missed a penalty. And I remember my dad being furious at Gordon Marshall in nets for Kilmarnock that day. He was like, you would never get a Rangers supporting goalkeeper trying that hard against Rangers if they needed to score a load of goals. I remember the visceral anger at Gordon Marshall that day.
Yeah, so such a strange way to end such a memorable season. But as we say, that's the ups and downs of football, Paul. Getting into 2003, 2004, you'll maybe need to refresh my memory because I don't really have much that jumps out at me from that season. What would your take be on that particular year?
I remember Rangers seemingly had a dreadful transfer window and we were miles ahead of them the whole season. There was a game around Christmas time, we beat them 3-0 and Alan Thompson scored like a 30-yard free kick. And I remember at that time thinking, we are so much better than Rangers. I remember being shocked that they didn't sack Alex McLeish. But the other standouts would be the Barcelona game, feeling like we were so far ahead of Rangers. And then late in the season, I think we made it to the UEFA Cup quarter-final, and we were drew against the winners of Roma or Villarreal, which as a kid I hadn't wasn't too familiar with Villarreal. They were just bursting onto the scene. I remember thinking, oh, so if we can get through, we're against Roma. And when we got paired against Villarreal, I thought, happy days, we're basically into the semis here. And just being shocked at how good Villarreal were in that second leg when they put us out, I think 2-0 on the night.
Yeah, and not much to get excited about. We're obviously moving into a time there as well where you're becoming the post Henrik Larsson Celtic. Yeah. I suppose I'll be guessing here, but I'm sure I'll be right that he would be your first Celtic hero, maybe your remaining Celtic hero. But how did you feel as a young man when Henrik Larsson was in tears? I'm sure, or I know that so many fans were in tears. How do you deal with that as a young guy?
I remember, yes, genuinely being absolutely heartbroken, never wanting to leave, but being told it's better he leaves now on a good note. Imagine it all went wrong. Imagine he never came back from his broken leg and we never would have even had these moments. I remember being told about all that and sort of being happy enough. And I remember being, oddly enough, very happy that he signed for Barcelona because the Scottish press had him linked with some, like, I'm pretty sure it was like Perugia. It was sort of like mid-table Serie A teams. And I remember he signed for Barcelona. I was like, of course he's going to sign for somebody like Barcelona. I don't know why there was this sort of thing. He's past it. When Henrik left, he was only 32. He was still a world-class player. So I was devastated to see him go, but I loved him so much. I was happy to see him go to a big team, even if it meant leaving Celtic.
Yeah, and he obviously kept himself very fit, and Alex Ferguson concedes that he tried to sign him several times, but I think Henrik Larsson was just content with his lot in life. He could have made more money, but he knew how adored he was by the Celtic people. His family were happy in Scotland. He could, with Martin O'Neill, potentially achieve his European ambitions or his goals in Europe. And I think lots of us were so pleased that he kicked on from Celtic and went on to further success. Famously, that win for Barcelona against Arsenal, where he came off the bench and played a big part in the 2 goals that won that game.
Yeah, 2 assists.
He could have stayed on at Man United as well, because I think he'd given his word that he would go back to Helsingborg, his original club, whilst he still had something left in the tank. And, he kind of showed his character by saying, thanks, but no thanks to Man United. I'm going to go and do that. And I think that's always been a thing, because when players leave Celtic, too many folks are quick to sink the boot in if they're not a success, particularly if they go to the Premier League. But Henrik Larsson continued, even though he'd left, he continued to fly the flag for Celtic, didn't he?
Yeah, he's the best ambassador you could ask for because he's such a down-to-earth guy. Sometimes when he does punditry, like, as much as I love Henrik, he's not Mr. Personality. You're not going to get no Chris Sutton. He's not going to give controversial statements. But you couldn't ask for a nicer, better guy to represent the club. Even to this day, when you hear him speak, it's not going to be anything crazy. It's going to be something heartfelt, something true. Yeah, you couldn't ask for a better hero than Henrik. And you're right, to this day, I'll be honest, nobody's came even close to Henrik. It's Henrik and then sort of everyone else in a lot of ways for my personal Celtic hero. Martin O'Neill be up there as well, but it's Henrik above everyone still.
Yeah, can't disagree with that. Let's go back to Martin O'Neill that you mentioned there, though, because not long after Larsson leaves, Martin O'Neill moves on. It's the end of the 2004-2005 season. I think we finished the season with a Scottish Cup win over Dundee United. Martin O'Neill takes his applause at Hampden Park. His wife Geraldine was unwell at the time, and he decides at that point that it is right for him to step back. You've talked there about how devastated you were to lose Henrik Larsson. Similar feelings with the manager?
I was gobsmacked when Martin O'Neill left. I just didn't see it coming. I remember a year or two before, they were saying he's agreed a deal to join Leeds, if you remember that. That was a big story at one point. It sort of fizzled out quickly. But I remember it was a big thing. He's agreed to join Leeds. I think O'Neill even commented in the press. He wasn't happy with the Celtic deal. Something about him joining Leeds. So that was the first time I thought, God, there will be a Celtic without Martin O'Neill. Sort of as a kid, he was the manager when my memory really kicks in. So it's like he'll be here forever. But I remember being gobsmacked when he actually left. And I ended up growing to like Strachan. But I remember my dad telling me, yeah, and it's going to be Gordon Strachan as his replacement. And being that young, I thought, why are we giving it to like a mid-table sort of Southampton manager? I thought we should go out and get Arsene Wenger type deal still at that age. But yeah, I remember being heartbroken when O'Neill left, and it was one of those first realizations that nothing's going to last forever in football. Hendrick's gone, Martin O'Neill's gone. That era when they both gone, that it was done. I know sort of had Hartson, Sutton, and Thompson, and maybe Bobo were still playing in the team under Strachan, but it was so obvious that when O'Neill went, that was the end of that era altogether.
Yeah, and tough times for all fans, young and old, at that time, because to lose one of those guys is sore. To lose them both, it's such a huge impact. Your best player, your best player of the whole modern era, and arguably your best manager since Jock Stein, and I think folks would still argue that remains the case with Martin O'Neill. But in terms of that, Paul, and we'll touch back briefly on his return to the club, but How should Martin O'Neill be remembered? What is his legacy for that glorious first spell between 2000 and 2005?
In my opinion, the best Celtic manager of my lifetime, and overall the best Celtic manager not named Jock Stein. I think he should be held in that high regard. A true club legend. Sort of, you hear the term legend thrown around a lot these days, to use that term. And it's sort of like, it's, you know, like Dembele, Kyogo, Edward. They're not club legends. They're well remembered. But for me, a legend is like one of a few people. Jock Stein's a legend. Billy McNeil's a legend. Jimmy Johnson's a legend. Henrik Larsson's a legend. Jimmy McGrory. Martin O'Neill's in that company, 100%. The top tier of all-time Celtic greats for me.
Yeah, and I don't think you'll hear anyone arguing with that point at all. Paul, we're going to move on to the final section of the show, but before we do so, any final comments on that era under Martin O'Neill from 2000 to 2005?
I don't want to get too soppy, but I miss it. I miss being a kid, living in that time, but I feel very lucky to have been able to live through it and be just old enough to remember it all. Euro 2000 was when I started watching football religiously, so I slowly got into it, didn't understand the 4-0 loss at Ibrox under Kenny Dalglish, so it was a perfect time. That's right when Martin O'Neill comes in, so I remember everything about that first season and his 5 years so vividly, and I'm just feel happy and lucky to have lived through them. Sorry if that's a wee bit too soppy, but I do. I genuinely feel lucky to have lived through that. That's my first memories as a fan.
Not at all, and a nice way to round that off. What I'll need to do, I'll maybe pick this up with you offline, but I'll be keen to get your primary 4 English teacher's contact details. I think he might have a few things to say on a future show.
A few funny stories about him, great guy.
Paul, the last section, part 3 of our chat today, and again, it's some quick fire questions for you. These are quite straightforward, quite standard Celtic questions, but all of these questions are of all time. For example, let's start with question number 1. Your favourite Celtic goal of all time?
I apologise in advance. It's so obvious. It has to be. I'd be lying if I said anything else. It's Henrik's chip in the 6-2 game. Whenever I come home drunk on from a night out or during any sentimental times, if I'm going to rewatch a goal, it's going to be that one.
Yeah, and you know, it's played time after time after time, and rightly so. Fella I know, guy called John Murray, shout to John this morning. John's an older guy, probably similar ages to my dad, actually, maybe a wee bit younger. John sent me a clip today, and it's just a Celtic trip down memory lane. He says, share this with your dad will like it. And it's almost like it's a whiz through. It starts with Jimmy Johnson, and it culminates actually in Tom Rodgich's goal in 2018, with various bits and bobs in between. But of course, Henrik Larsson's chip is in that montage. And you won't actually get any compilation of Celtic greatest goals in recent times without it. It's a brilliant goal. And again, nobody can argue with it.
The club YouTube channel only recently released this, do you know what they do now, the unique angle of goals? They've had this all along. It's a unique angle of Henrik's goal, and you don't get to see it on like the official clips from Sky back in the day because they cut their replay. But Henrik's doing a big man like parade in front of the fans when he's celebrating. It's great stuff. I tried to use it in a video, and Celtic right away put a copyright thing on it, so they don't want other people using that that clip of Henrik that you can't see anywhere else.
Okay. One of my favourite Henrik Larsson moments, it comes in the game where Celtic stopped the 10 in May 1998, and obviously that would be, you'd be a child, a real child at that
don't
time.
Remember it,
yeah, but I'm sure you're well familiar with the story of the day. And of course, Larsson opens the scoring very early. I feel like it was 4 minutes in or something like that, but very early he opens the scoring. But that is not my favourite Larsson moment of the day. My favourite moment is when, I think it's Jackie McNamara that breaks down the right after a Tom Boyd pass.
Yep.
He squares it for Harold Bratback. The much maligned Harold Bratback, might I add, who scores the goal that makes history and stops the 10. But my favourite Larsson moment is the fact that he jumps on Bratback's back,
and
he gives him the credit.
Yeah.
He points down. And I think that shows that everyone knows Henrik Larsson for his goal scoring exploits and everything he done. That showed how good a teammate he was, because he could have taken all the glory. He was the guy that opened the scoring. He was the main man that season. But he was keen to give Bratback his due, his credit for the part he played in Celtic history. I thought it was a big moment.
That's a great. I've never thought of it that way before, but that does in many ways sum up Henrik. A guy that scored so much, but still, despite his goal scoring record, wasn't a selfish player. He had assists weren't so much counted religiously then the way they are now. But I'd be interested to see if Henrik had over 100 assists, because off the top of my head, I would guess on top of his 242 goals, it would be over 100 assists, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm going to reach out to Dr. Ian Graham and ask him if he can check that out.
Get Alan Morrison on the phone, he'll know, he knows everything.
Alan Morrison will know, we'll check it out. Question number 2, not to be negative with this question, but obviously you've spoken highly of Henrik Larsson as your favourite Celtic player. Who would be your least favourite Celtic player and why?
Because of his comments in recent times, my least favourite Celtic player is Al Berkovic. He's turned himself into a bit of a right-wing media figure, despicable character, it seems like. it has to be him. I don't.
Yeah, I can't argue.
Mo Johnson, I know for turning everything that happened. I obviously have no memory of that. I learned about that much later. For me, Berkovic, never want to. He'll never come near Celtic Park again, and I wouldn't want to see him there.
Yeah, absolutely not. The guy that springs to mind for me there, I'm making this about me now. I don't mean to, but just the guy that springs out in terms of my least favourite player. It's going to sound a bit petty, but it is what it is. It's Timo Pukki. And the reason for that, he obviously went on to have huge success at Norwich and Finland, and I think he's just finished his international career with Finland, and he's an absolute hero there and a hero for Norwich for what he done. I think he was part of that kind of yo-yo side at Norwich that got promotion, relegation, etc. But it was for comments that he made years after leaving Celtic, and I'll dig them out at some point, but it's along the lines of, yeah, when I was at Celtic, I just didn't care enough. I wasn't that interested, blah, 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 and I didn't try particularly hard. And I remember the first time I read them, I was furious at that time. And he was part of that Ronnie Dyler era, wasn't he? I was furious at that time because I thought there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Celtic fans across the globe that would bite the hand off for the opportunity to just once pull on a Celtic shirt. And he was so dismissive of it. And the fact that he didn't really care and didn't try and wasn't that bothered at that time, it just sticks with me. I don't know why. He's probably a brilliant guy, a lovely guy, but that rankles with me at this moment.
That's disappointing. I never knew he said that. I never thought particularly highly of him just as a player. So now I'll stick him. He's in there with Berkovic and Mo Johnson then.
Yeah, I can see the rise and fall of Timo Pukki appearing on your channel sometime soon. Next one would be, and you may have covered it, you may not have already, but your favourite Celtic result, your favourite win, or maybe it wasn't a win, but your favourite result.
Did I lift? I don't think I lifted. I think I had one more visual prop. 2 seconds.
Go for it.
Did I remember to lift it? I did indeed. So as a kid for Christmas, I got given this, the full VHS box set of the treble winning season. And funny enough, it wasn't the 6-2 game that I watched back on the most. It was winning 3-0 at Ibrox when Henrik scored his 50th of the season and Lubo scored 2. Because 2 years before, they had won 3-0 at Celtic Park. And this just showed how things had completely turned on their head. It was such a glorious day. That's what I first remember hearing Celtic fans singing, "You're simply depressed." And I remember I had a cold that day, but it's still one of my favourite memories. So it would be easy to say 6-2, but I didn't fully understand the gravity of 6-2, whereas winning 3-0 at Ibrox 8 months later or whatever, I fully understood it by then.
Yeah, and did Larsson, was that his 50th goal of a 53-goal season?
That's right. And Sean Maloney could have tapped it in. Thank God he didn't.
Yes.
He could have sold it on the line. Yeah.
I know. Do you know, it sounds like in some ways we're being anti-Sean Maloney, but I was going to mention he very nearly stole it in the line.
I always really liked Sean Maloney as well, but I'm doing nothing but slabber about him here.
Yeah, a decent lad, as I say. Good luck to Sean, whatever happens. But he nearly took that moment from Henrik. But yeah, I can understand. That's a great shout, 3-0. Because Lubo had that moment as well, because he was in and out a wee bit under Martin O'Neill, and there is an argument that O'Neill maybe should have played him a wee bit more than he did, but maybe he's seen that the legs were going a wee bit. But what an incredible talent Lubo Moravcik was. And to see him, what I loved about Lubo, when he scored the 2 goals in the 5-1 win over Rangers, he was a wee bit like, all right, what's all the fuss about? It's just another game of football. By the time it got to that Ibrox game, he knew what it meant.
He's a Green Brigade member by that point, basically. Yeah. My one negative memory of Lubo, unfortunately not his fault, was during, I think it might have been during the next season, so around 2001, 2002, he did a book signing at the Celtic shop in Belfast, and me and my dad queued up for over an hour. It would be a lie to say we were next in the door. We were about 6 people back, and they closed it off and said he has to go. I was so close to getting to meet him and get a photo with him. Missed out.
That is disappointing. Yeah. That's a shame. Get him on the list with Timo Pukki and Mo Johnson.
Yeah. Fuck you, Lubo.
Fair enough. What about, and let's take Seville out of this, a Celtic result that still annoys you, as a result that you could maybe, if you had the chance, you could change?
An odd choice, but it was such a frustrating night that I'm picking under Martin O'Neill again during that glory era. It was an away Champions League game. In the UEFA Cup, we seemed to be fine away. Remember, there was a curse under the Martin O'Neill team away from home. We lost 1-0 to 10-man Anderlecht, and they went down to 10 men after about 20 minutes, if I remember. And I remember it being such a frustrating night of, we were 3-0 up at home against them in like 20 minutes, and we just couldn't score. And it was the most frustrating memory I had at the time, and it's still to this day. We should have been beaten 10 man. Our team was more than good enough to win that game. I don't know how we didn't do it.
Yeah, we seem to have that thing under Martin O'Neill where you could almost but guarantee we would win the home leg at Celtic Park, but equally guarantee we would lose the away game. And that seemed to be the thing for a time. And I can't remember the stat, but at some point during the O'Neill era, we hadn't been beaten in X number of games, but it was like heading towards the 20s in terms of home games in Europe and something. It was a really phenomenal record. But yeah, I can see why a result like that would stick in your throat. In a slightly different ballpark, what would be your favourite Celtic kit of all time? It may well be one of the hoops, or it might be one of the away efforts. Where are you at?
I don't have it with me, but it's the first kit I saw Celtic playing in. It's the 95 to 97 home jersey. It sort of has Celtic badges imprinted on the green hoops, like in the background. The one Canio wore, basically, that home jersey.
Yeah.
I had it for years as a kid. It's my favourite one still. I've bought a reprint of it over the years, but I'd like to get a proper one with the Umbro logo, because the Celtic thing resells them, but doesn't have Umbro because we're not sponsored by them anymore. I'd like to get a proper one. I have the one before that, the 93 to 95 one that has the really thick hoops. I found an authentic one of those, but I can't find an authentic 95 to 97 home jersey. That's my favourite one still.
Yeah, and you know, there's some great kind of resellers online. There's also a shop just next to the Barras that do a lot of resale Celtic shirts. So maybe next time you find yourself in Glasgow, you could take a trip in there and see if you can dig that one out.
You can bring me, Tino, because I want to meet everybody the next time. Everybody apart from Cy Ferry. I want to meet everybody from Celtic Fan Media when I get over in a few months' time.
We'll just have a big melting pot of Celtic Fan Media. And likewise, your least favourite Celtic shirt and why?
It would have been around, was it Rogers' first time, I think, or maybe Lennon, when Lennon... anyway, it was around 2018-ish. We had this third kit that was grey with like a pink V on it. I remember Scott Brown wearing it. A horrendous looking kit. I have no idea why anybody gave that the okay. I think it was New Balance. Grey with a pink V tick type thing going across the middle. Rotten kit.
Yeah, I can picture Ryan Christie wearing that,
Yes.
I'm sure, as part of the promo stuff. And I remember there was some, I believe, post-kit release rationale as to why there was some pink in the kit. And the story goes that it was pink to reflect the colour that was used on the original ticket for the 1967 European Cup final. I believe there was a flash of pink across that ticket, and I believe that was just marketing bullshit, basically. some post-kit rationale to say that why. But it was a shocker.
We had the all pink away third kit at one point. It was like all pink with black shorts. I didn't mind that as much. It reminded me of another childhood hero, Bret the Hitman Hart, with the pink and black. So I like that one. But the grey kit with the pink one, even with that story about the European ticket, that kit always stood out to me for, it's one I never bought anyway, put it that way.
Yeah, it was a shocker. So let's move on quickly. Last question. This is a big question. This is the one that gets clipped up and replayed and get used as a stick to beat you with. But who would be, and I'm going to be quite specific here, your favourite Celtic YouTuber? So less podcaster, less, TikTok blogger. Your favourite Celtic YouTuber. You've got a few to choose from.
It changes by the day, and I really am the sort of person. I watch everybody. Ran118, Hamish Carton, everybody, yourself, Paul John Deggs, Jim Orr. My favourite at the minute, I'm just going for the one I watched this morning, so he gets the vote. And he is, and I say this affectionately, slightly insane. It's Baz from One Celtic Fan's View. The guy's off his head in the best sort of ways. He does impressions. He does every morning, every evening. He's so dedicated that he deserves a shout out. So Baz, as of this morning, you're my favourite Celtic YouTuber. That'll change tomorrow.
Yeah, asterisk, subject to change. But at this moment in time, big shout out to Baz, because I think I've caught some of his stuff as well. He's very dedicated and consistent. He switches on the mic and the camera, and he just goes for it at length sometimes, doesn't he?
He never stops. He is dedicated as gets. He's relentless with his content. He does some hilarious impressions at times, just off the top of his head. He goes on a few insane ramblings, but I like that it isn't just all younger guys like yourself, Tino, that we get a few old heads like Jim Orr and Baz in. I like that sort of thing to watch. So Baz, as of today, it goes to you.
Nice one. So well done to Baz. And incredible mentions to Ryan. Ryan's been in the studio a few times. Hamish as well. Hamish is a good friend of the show. And Paul John, I was on with Paul John last Friday.
Watched it,
he's a massive fan of what you're doing as well, Paul.
Oh, thanks for that. I really appreciated it. Paul John Deggs, the best guy going, Celtic Fan Media, great guy. But yeah, I do enjoy everybody. I don't want to be, when I'm doing these, I don't mean to call people out in a bad way. I only call out people if they do something that truly deserves it. So that's why Cy Ferry's a regular. Slaney, not so bad. Kevin Kyle, not so bad. Cy Ferry, I would love. I'll leave it there.
Fair enough. We'll keep the Cy Ferry chat for the outtakes. We'll put that for the added extras later on. Before I forget, you're sitting with a Guess Who style board in front of you. All of us, from certain eras will remember Guess Who. Does he have a hat? Does he wear glasses? Click, click. Is it Tom? All these guys. who features? Give us a flavour. That I don't know how many folks are on that. About 20. Who
Yeah.
features on your Guess Who board and
I've
why?
printed out so many more that I can even use. You can see the front where you've got End the Call, you've got Ram 118, you've got Baz front and centre, you've got Asim. Everybody I could think of. I printed out about 50 and I had to cut them out with a pair of scissors to get them to fit in. And so whoever made the cut, congratulations. I'll change it up for another video because I do have about another 20, like an insane person, like these cutouts of people's faces. And a lot of them I didn't even do the scale properly. So for some people, like Hamish, it's like a proper photo, and then for other people like Ram 118, it's extremely zoomed in on his face. But yeah, like a lunatic cutting people out of a newspaper, have all these cuttings of Celtic fan content media's faces lying around the house. So I'm sure the wife loves opening a drawer and seeing seeing Jim Orr's face looking back at her in the morning.
Do you ever play Celtic Guess Who with your wife and or friends and family, or is it just for show?
I'll do it online someday. I'll get somebody else to print it out and we can do a live stream of Guess Who. The only one I did on that stream was Does He Love Peter Allwell? And it was, of course, the Celtic Quick News guy, Paul Brennan, is it? Yeah. That's the only one I've played so far with myself. Played with myself, yeah.
Okay, so watch this space for Celtic Guess Who live with
special,
Paul Murphy at some point. Paul, we are kind of closing things down. It's been a great chat. It's been great fun to speak to you, and it's been a long time coming, and thanks for coming on the Celtic Exchange this afternoon. Just in terms of Celtic in the here and now, as mentioned at the top of the piece, a massive night in Europe for Martin O'Neill and for Celtic, getting that win over Feyenoord. But Wilfred Nancy looks to be all but a done deal. There were suggestions that he might be announced as early as this weekend. He won't be in charge against Hibs. That will be Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney's swan song. Okay. But he should come in ahead of the Dundee game next week. What's your hopes and expectations from his appointment? Is it one that you're pleased with? I mentioned earlier that Family Guy episode where Peter chooses the mystery box. It feels like that's what we've kind of done with Big Willie. But I don't really fully know what to expect. I have to admit, I'm a religious football manager player. I know a lot of managers, but I wasn't familiar with them until we were linked with them. I don't really keep up with MLS particularly. But it's the exciting thing in modern football. When you watch even an international tournament, there's so many less unknowns than there used to be. When you're watching the World Cup back in the day, it was sort of exotic new players you'd never heard of. You've kind of heard of most people now. And I do like and find it exciting that we've gone for somebody really outside the box. So that's where my hopes lie in sort of the unknown of what's going to happen with brother Wilfred, as you called him. Full of hope. It wouldn't have been my first choice, but I'm excited that we've done something different, basically. I'm similar in ways to that. I'm quite excited about it. Like yourself and most, I wouldn't have known him at all, maybe just, a short couple of weeks ago. But my take has been that the more I read, the more videos I watch, the more quotes that come out around him, the more excited I'm getting, because everyone speaks about him in glowing terms. The big question, and the proof will be in the pudding, is if he can transfer what he's doing in the MLS. And, you can argue what's a stronger league, MLS or Scottish football, but they're very different. The pace of them is different. And obviously we've got the unique challenge of what we do in Europe. And the big question is, can he transfer the very enjoyable, by all accounts, swashbuckling style of play into what's happening here at Celtic? I mean, there's a lot of debate, particularly this morning, after a win over Feyenoord, that why are we getting rid of Martin O'Neill? Surely we need to keep him till Christmas or summer, or at least for the cup final. But I get the feeling, Paul, and he's a hero to you, and he's a hero to me, and he's a hero to so many in Celtic world. I think Martin O'Neill will be quite happy to dust off the tracksuit for one last occasion on Sunday and then sail back off into the sunset. Yes, I agree. It feels like that is what he wants. And if that's what he wants, I'm more than happy with it. He's been amazing coming back. I didn't have high hopes for him coming back, but I've loved it. It's not going to happen. My ideal scenario is that Martin O'Neill is maybe chairman, or at least has a place on the board at some point. I would love to have him still involved with the club, even if it is just sort of an ambassador role, but I'd love him to be on the board because he seems to still have that ambition for Celtic in Europe that the Desmonds openly don't have and say it's too hard. Martin O'Neill still seems to have that. I would love him still involved in the club, even after he leaves this spell. Yeah, I think most of us would, and ultimately it'll come down to Martin O'Neill. I mentioned this morning that I don't think he's the kind of guy that wants to play a bit part. He doesn't want to be a supporting role to anybody, and that might be what it comes down to. But there is no doubt he's got a massive skill set that could be beneficial to Celtic if he decides to take that route. So let's see what happens there in the coming days. Paul, just as we start to wrap up, your final comments on the direction of Channel 67, or another one from Paul. What do you see in the next 12 months and beyond? What are you hoping to do? What can viewers expect from you in the next wee while? I absolutely love doing it. I want to say thanks to everybody that's got in touch, and like it, from yourself to Paul John Dex. I couldn't appreciate it more. When I first decided to do it, I genuinely, hand to God, thought this will get like no views.
my Paddy McCourt, Neil Hadj Diouf videos will get me views. They're the ones, they pay the bills. This is just for a bit of fun. Couldn't believe that I ever got positive feedback on these. I can't do them weekly because I like to let sort of things save up. I like to let things happen and then comment on them. So you'll maybe get them once a month or a wee bit even less regular than that. But there's going to be plenty more of that to come. And in between them, I'll be posting weekly videos on obscure players. The next one I think I've got lined up. I've got one for F.A. Ambrose coming up. I've got about 15 player biographies in the bank that I'll release. I'm afraid to release anything at the minute because I released a video a few weeks ago and then right away it was announced Rodgers left. So right away nobody's interested in it. I feel like if I post a video now, we'll announce the new manager immediately. So I've gone a couple of weeks without posting a video, but plenty more to come, and over time, plenty more Channel 67 to come.
Yeah, and we'll look forward to whatever's next. There's not many guests that come on, Paul, and mentioned that Hadj Diouf is the man that pays the bills for them, so it's interesting to hear that. Paul, as I say, a pleasure to have you on. Any final comments before we wrap this one up?
Thanks so much for having me on, Tino. I've been a big fan of Celtic Exchange since I watched the battle to save Celtic with David Lowe a year or two ago. That's whenever I first really got into the channel. Couldn't find that video last night. Would love to watch it again. I don't know what's happened to it, but I like that so much. I think I mentioned it before. I watched that whole thing twice. Great interview. Big fan of the channel. But just thanks so much for having me on. And thanks to everybody for all the... the internet can be a place with a lot of negativity. Feedback I've got for this has been amazing, and I really do appreciate it all.
Brilliant. And listen, it's been well deserved, Paul. It's been, I think, as well as anything, what you do is enjoyable. It's light relief at a time when things are a wee bit heavy in Celtic world, and I think that's why it's such a good place to go. So as I mentioned at the top, if you haven't already done so, check out another one from Paul in terms of the channel. Paul's at Channel 67 on Twitter, and he's now here on Celtic Exchange. Paul, great to have you on. We'll see you again really soon.
Thanks so much, Tino.